everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome our panelists today, Dr. Ronjon Ng and Patrick Bangert. Hello, Dr. Ng. Hello, Patrick.
Hello. Nice to be here.
So what we're going to do today is we are going to start with some opening remarks from our two panelists. Then we will set the baseline defining what AI is. We'll move on to some of the questions that you have posed to the panelists. And then we'll end with some closing remarks. So that's the agenda for today. With that said, I'm going to first invite Patrick to deliver his opening remarks. Outside of your standard bio, Patrick, is there anything that you're excited about considering the theme for this panel, which is AI in business?
Yeah, hi everybody. Great to be here, and great to be at an event in India. I've traveled extensively, and I have very fond memories of India before I got locked down because of COVID. So I hope everybody's okay and staying safe. AI in business, of course, is near and dear to my heart. I run the P&L organization at Samsung that deals with all things AI. So if you happen to have a mobile phone, the natural language processing command and control module is from us, the face recognition, the fingerprint scanning, the chatbots on the website, the image recognition. So all that comes out of our labs. So we pretty much cover all of the different scientific use cases of artificial intelligence, and of course, how to turn that into a business is a very interesting debate. And you have to marry together some science and some of the usual metrics of profitability to make that happen, and that's very interesting. But in my heart, I still remain a mathematician, so I pay close attention to the details.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Ng?
Yes, thank you for having me today. I'm sitting here in Palo Alto. I think like Patrick's, he's in the Valley too. But I originate from India by descent, of course, and but I was born in the UK. So my background's electrical engineering, and basically did speech recognition at Cambridge, working on neural nets, and then went to MIT, and then went to Stanford, not in the engineering department, but or the computer science department, but the psychology department. And that's one of the things that is kind of interesting is, AI is sort of like more of a multidisciplinary kind of activity with many departments contributing to different areas. Like Patrick, I've done a lot of mobile stuff. The first company I sold was to Motorola, doing speech and handwriting recognition. And the first thing they told me to do was doing Chinese handwriting recognition, even though I don't read or write Chinese. But if you have a mathematics, just as Patrick said, if you've got a mathematics background, it helps a lot. So going back to fundamentals is useful. And I sold another company to BlackBerry, doing mobile app store. That's where we're crowdsourcing intelligence. The phones have these app stores, and there's millions of apps, you can think of it as AI is more than just the algorithmic techniques. And the third company I was more the advisor investor is Vocal IQ. We sold that to Apple. And I have done something with Samsung, Patrick. We've got the Smart Switch app, which is on every Samsung phone. That's with my company, Markspace, one of my companies. And I've invested and have part ownerships of about 60 AI companies. I'm a fellow at Stanford, and I teach an introductory AI class, and then AI in healthcare. And my sort of specialism these days is looking how AI can work with other disciplines, and in particular, this intersection of mathematics and biology is where my personal interest is. But the thing about artificial intelligence, and we'll go on to the next question later on, is that it can apply in any part of the business. It could be the products part, putting speech recognition on a phone, or making a clever wearable, or it could be the operations part. It's not actually building the product, but how do you make your organization AI first? And so those are sort of research topics I'm interested in. And at Stanford University, the research topic I'm involved in is this Boundaries of Humanity project. Now, I was working on AI 35 years ago, and people were doing telephone digit recognition, and then people would just fall off their chair. It was just like 10 digit, and now people are so blasé. So Google now got a word wrong. But yet we still have major challenges. So Boundaries of Humanity, as these products have more personality, more strength, at what point does what defines a human? At what point do machines become so lifelike? And we know they're machines, but what do we actually change our reaction to them? And then does that change us? And then how do we act with animals, machines, and humans in the age of biotechnology and AI? So I'll stop there and get on to your next question, Pramod. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very fascinating. I would also say that, between Patrick and Dr. Ng, they can answer any and every AI question that you can think of, but we only have about 30 minutes or so. So let's keep moving here. Now, when we talk about AI, some companies will say that they automate something and that's AI. Everybody wants to be on the AI bandwagon. I know, Dr. Ng, you briefly touched upon potentially your definition, but I would like you to maybe think about a baseline fundamental definition while I pose this question to Patrick. What's the baseline definition or minimum requirements for something to be considered AI? Patrick, in your
It's a good question, and of course, vocabulary is at the heart of this, right? So there are multiple words or phrases that are bandied about, like machine learning and artificial intelligence, and they're basically mean the same thing now. They didn't used to. They meant something very different back in the day, but these days, I think the bar has sunk, because, as you mentioned, many people will call almost any kind of a software utility an AI these days. As far as I'm concerned, the critical thing that differentiates any AI system, whether it's truly AI or just machine learning or something like that, is really the aspect of learning. So it's really a conversion from a set of data to a quote unquote model. And what I mean by a model is ultimately a mathematical equation, whether that's in the form of a neural network or a decision tree or something else. It's effectively a formula. So AI is that thing that turns a collection of data into an equation representation of the underlying pattern, whether that happens to be a language, an image, a set of numbers, or whatever. And that's ultimately what AI is. And the use case of what I do with that equation is something else altogether.
Yeah, I can see why you said in the introduction that you consider yourself a mathematician, Patrick.
Yeah, sorry, it's an occupational hazard.
The definition, it's great. Dr. Ng, anything to add to that or your earlier description?
Yeah, certainly. Let me give you an academic viewpoint. So, the original technical definition of artificial intelligence from the Dartmouth Conference in 1956 was that AI is human-like intelligence, being able to do things that a human can do, and be able to transfer learning. If humans are very good at transfer learning, they can actually they can do one thing, they can do another thing. So most things we see out there do not meet that definition. And so we have other definitions. Machine learning, which is maybe the technical definition would be numerical recipes to solve or optimize or recognize functions and patterns. But Wittgenstein, who was a philosopher at Trinity College, Cambridge, was actually an engineer, became a philosopher and so basically looked at language and how is language defined. And he basically said, look, the words are defined by the way they are used. So as Patrick's already mentioned, really the cat's out of the bag. People are using these words interchangeably. There's no real point in getting to debate saying, oh, well, that's not AI, that's ML, or that's ML, that's not AI. People are using it interchangeably. And this is not just the lay press, this is even the scientific press as well, who are using these words interchangeably. So I don't think we need to really get into debates on what definitions are. I think it's kind of like, you know it when you see it. It could be certainly learning. If you go again to original sort of embodiments of AI, which use like symbolic systems approaches, which was in the 1960s and 70s, where we were trying to get a machine to solve these problems, but it was not so much learning, but by incorporating knowledge into a machine. And really the difficult problem is, how do we do that? How do we encode knowledge? And there's computer languages that popped up like Prolog and Lisp, and hardware that popped up. That might be another way to get to the end result, which is doing something that is closer to what humans can do. But we're nowhere near like human real performance, except in sort of like very, very toy vertical problems.
Thank you. So what I took away from that was learning, according to Patrick and Dr. Ng. You know it when you see it. I like that one as well. So let's move on to some of what I consider current topics. And these are a flavor of questions that were sent by program participants, just to make sure that you get the most value out of this discussion. So I'll start with a question about maturity. What is the maturity level of AI solutions and services across industries? And instead of covering several industries, maybe you can pick your favorite one. So Patrick, you can go first, and then Dr. Ng. You want to talk about a specific industry and what's the maturity level that you see with respect to AI in that industry?
Right. So overall, I would say the maturity level is immature at a fairly low level across the board. The industry that I think is most mature is retail. And here we're seeing a particular kind of artificial intelligence that's called the recommender system. I think in terms of AI systems that are actually deployed as opposed to being researched, the recommender system is maybe 50 to 60% of global AI deployment. And what it does is essentially recommends to a human user what to buy. This is, for example, what's behind the suggestion on what to watch on Netflix, what to buy on Amazon, which web page to go to, and so on. There are huge data centers that do nothing but execute recommender systems. And in terms of the fact that you, as a human being, actually end up doing what these systems tell you, they're very sophisticated and very good and very successful. The amount of money that they make their owners is astounding. So in terms of that maturity level, I think that's the highest level. But whether that's something that we like or that is good for us is a different topic. But from the point of view of their business owners, that's the most mature application that I know.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Nag?
Yes, I think as you said before, we're nowhere near the technical definition. We'd like to be, I think. Many of us would like to see this Star Trek world where everything's our beck and call and they do things automatically for us in every domain. But we're nowhere near there. And the field has boom bust times in where we are, and certainly we've had a nice boom in the last 10 years or so. I think the thinking is that the main techniques that people are using now, deep learning, and similar type of systems. Are we in what we call mathematically a local minimum? Everyone rushes. This thing works, and everyone rushes to do it. There's lots of other techniques and that are out there that can solve problems. And our current way to do it, you need lots and lots of data. We need to learn from it. As humans, often we don't need a lot of data. And I'll recognize both of your faces tomorrow afternoon if I see you in the street, if I'm allowed to go out in the street, just for the few looks. And so are there other ways? And certainly the Bayesian type techniques. There's something called Bayes' rule, which has been used for learning historically, maybe coming back to the form. The industry I like is probably biology and healthcare. I would also say that's nascent. My little joke is, us computer scientists, like we're muscling into all these industries that we knew nothing about, and we say, it's sort of, only half jokingly saying, what, you've been using trial and error all this time, and we've got this thing called data science that might be able to help. And but on the flip side, I think we're at a disruptive threshold. The $30 trillion budget for Medicare for all in the United States to give free healthcare for everybody in the United States has been estimated to be $30 trillion. I don't think that's factoring in technology improvements, where right now it takes $1 billion and 20 years to get a new drug. Can we actually decimate or centimate those numbers by using machine learning to have a much higher probability of creating a new drug? And the data that's exploding from the wearables that we're wearing is giving us so much data that we could actually be quite optimistic for the future. But right now we're just on the edge. We're just on the sort of really at the beginning of doing that. We can't even store the data because we're generating so much happening. So I think that would be there. And then some of the more mature segments, debatably, in some back to your business aspects, in sort of automation. My mini field was in handwriting recognition, and post offices use that for zip code. And I remember working on a bank check handwriting recognizer at MIT 30 years ago. And now you can go to your ATM and it just scans it. It's just common use, and it sort of centimated being 1/100th the cost of processing bank checks in the banking system. There are some mature segments, but they're usually very vertical, usually very, very vertical.
Yes, thank you. And Patrick, when you were talking about recommender systems, having a data background, it took me back to my consulting days a long time ago when we would do market basket analysis just by churning the data. So it's interesting how AI can enable that. And healthcare, of course, Dr. Nag. Actually, that gives me a good segue into my next question. You talk about, accelerating the drug pipeline and so on. So, of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic, and I want to extend my well wishes to people in India who are heavily impacted as we speak, and a lot of our program participants are from India. But with that said, one of the side benefits, if you can even call that, about the pandemic is that it has increased adoption of technology in general, digitization, and anecdotally, you hear from people that it has also increased adoption of AI, perhaps by several years. So again, starting with Patrick, what are your thoughts on what the pandemic has done to overall AI adoption and innovation in the last 1 year or so?
Yeah, I think definitely the adoption of AI has gone up across the board. Of course, more so than that, the adoption of simply computerized technologies have gone up, right? So, I mean, we've seen companies like Zoom basically blossom out of nowhere over a very short span of time. Not that that's artificial intelligence, but because everybody had to stay home and do everything virtually, any kind of automation and software usage went up, and that includes AI. So again, in terms of the consumer, the individual human being at home, many of these commercial AI systems that tell you what to watch and tell you what to buy, or allow you to automate some of these processes in your house, have become popular. From a company's point of view, I think a lot of technologies were introduced to allow their employees to work from home more efficiently, to communicate with each other. In that sense, virtual reality, augmented reality applications have become introduced that maybe weren't introduced before. But in that sense, you also have to recognize that adopting AI in the workplace or by a company takes a long time. Right? As a consumer in your house, you can say, oh, I'm going to sign up for Netflix, and just do it. And 20 minutes later, there you are. And it recommends movies to watch. That's an AI system. But as a company, you can't say, okay, so I've got, speaking of myself here, I've got 14 offices in 14 countries. I've got 2,000 employees. Let me roll out this software by tomorrow afternoon. It's not going to happen. So I would say in terms of adoption of AI in business, decisions have been taken to adopt AI or to roll out AI, but that adoption by the actual users is of course much slower because of change management and such. And so that is either ongoing or will be ongoing. But the pandemic has accelerated that process. Which brings me to my final sentence, if I may. It's change management that really is the number one risk for AI and AI adoption. It has nothing to do with AI, but it's the users ultimately being willing and able and trained and educated and so on to use these systems that is make or break for the entire thing.
Yeah, who moved my cheese? Yeah. Dr. Ng?
Yes. I think in business, following on Patrick's last point, a lot of the deployment is not the actual AI technology itself, but is the product definition component. Does anyone actually care what problem you're solving? This is like classic product management and kind of activities, or operational kind of activities, prioritizing what you can do and what you can't do. I mean, one thing that the pandemic has shown is like necessity is the mother of invention. And it reminds me of the 4-minute mile run by Roger Bannister. No one had run it. Roger Bannister ran the mile in 4 minutes, and within 9 months, 30 people had run it in 4 minutes as well. And I think this is kind of what you're seeing here. Well, okay, we're stuck. Whatever the dimension is, Zoom came from nowhere, and within, Skype had an 18-year head start, and then Zoom comes in like 2 months and sort of overtakes. I think in AI, I think even like the COVID vaccine, the actual vaccine like took 2 days to generate, right? No, it wasn't completely all mathematics. There was a lot of extra work. We got benefit from the Ebola program and all that. But it took a year to test it. Everyone said it was going to take 8 years to test it. But there's lots of people did these adaptive trials, these Bayesian trials, using these mathematical techniques to get things quicker. Again, necessity is the mother of invention. We say, look, we need to use the tool. The tool's out there. Let's use it, right? We didn't use it before because this, and this, and that. Let's figure out how we can use it. And I think that in business, you really have to figure out first, what is our problem? What's the problem we need to solve? And if machine learning can solve it, great. If it's putting a person watching lights, great. But often some of these problems need to be very scalable and automated and the like. And that drives you what you should think about doing. And that goes back to, again, Patrick's earlier comment is, how do you engender the learnings, the instinct across the organization, right from the receptionist to the CEO, to say, well, look, we need to be able to react quickly and use the most advanced technologies, either for our products or for running the company. And I think it's more of an organizational thing that, in a way, it's got to be driven from the top, in my opinion.
Yes, and by doing so, I think both of you have answered the next question from our participants, which is essentially related to critical success factors. And Patrick, you talked about change management. Dr. Ng, you spoke about a top-down approach, sponsorship. So yeah, I think those are great inputs. So there is a tactical question about, let's say that you are a multinational company, which a lot of our participants belong to multinational companies. What is a better approach to deliver an AI application? Do you recommend that you have a centralized approach where the global headquarters deploys an AI solution, or do you recommend a more localized approach? Patrick?
Right. I would say that really depends on what exactly it is that you're doing. If you expect that all regions behave the same, then I would say centralized is the best, because then you make one model, you copy it everywhere, and that's it. And that would apply to applications where you're modeling nature, right? You're modeling a physical, chemical, biological process that's going to happen in the same fashion throughout the world. So I did a lot of my work in the oil and gas industry. A refinery works the same way in the United States or in Thailand. And so if I make a model in one place, I can copy and paste it somewhere else, and it will work fine. So the centralized approach is great. If I'm trying to model human behavior, for example, in the retail industry, I'm trying to forecast how many products are going to be purchased within 1 week at a store in New York City or at a store in Mumbai. My models will not be the same. They cannot, because people's behavior is different. The reasons for going there are different. The holidays are different. The opening hours are different. And I'm going to have to localize. I may start with a global model because I don't know any better, but a few months later, after gathering some more data from each of the local stores, I find that in flight, my models are really bad, and then I have to adjust them to the local conditions.
Great, thank you, Patrick. How about you, Dr. Ng?
Yeah, I think if you've got a large organization, I've been in large organizations. It's I mean, the high order bit is you need a success case anywhere. Usually that's a small success case, and again, multinationals are usually quite comfortable with this concept, and often, multinationals they'll test their products or their services in countries like Australia or New Zealand. So if it doesn't work, no one knows. And but then if it does work, it's great. And clearly, it's going to be different in if they go and try it in Beijing. But so at least we had a success case. It worked. We might need different training data or different. Need to adapt it, and then there might be fundamentally hybrid models. And in India, we know we've got this sort of language, Hinglish, where we intersperse Hindi and English at the same time, and it's just like a mixture of Hindi and English. There's no good doing a Hindi recognizer or an English recognizer. You need a bit of both, and I guess in Singapore it's Singlish. There's a lot of countries are like that. It's something that where you think you can just apply it because there's enough English speakers in a particular country, it will work. But being localized is thing. But again, one of the recipes in the little class I teach, I say, well, how do we roll it out? Let's get a success, get people bought in, because often people will be skeptical whether it will work in their environment.
Thank you. Great responses again. The next question is actually a personal favorite of mine, which is talking about the regulatory and ethical issues associated with AI. So as a side note, I am actually pursuing a graduate program right now in criminal justice. I got bored with the data analytics part of things, looks like. But anyway, so even in criminal justice, there is a lot of applications of AI, such as determining the sentencing terms. Even in policing, there are technologies used such as facial recognition, which you can say it is AI, which can potentially lead to bias, against certain communities and certain sections of the society. Now, bringing it back to business, let's take a scenario of approving a mortgage application. And let's say you're using an AI technology to facilitate that. Again, you can think about potentially bias being present because of demographics, where people live and so on. So, how do you address the potential for bias, discrimination, if you want to use that term, when we use more and more of AI and machine learning in business versus, humans, which you can argue that humans are probably inherently biased also, but where do you draw the line? What are some of the recommendations when it comes to issues such as those?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the progress being made right now in the field, it's really the AI ethics and its brother AI explainability that are making the most progress right now. And I think that's where the progress is also needed the most. The mathematics we've pretty much figured out. There's some work to be done, but it's at a fairly advanced stage. But the ethical and explainability work is in its infancy. I think right now, as a society, as a global society, we have no idea what ethical standards to give to AI systems. Right now, for example, if I drive my car and kill someone, it's perfectly well understood who is responsible and what the results are. But if my almost fully autonomous car drives over somebody and kills them, it's completely unclear what's going to happen, who's responsible. So things like this are ethical issues. A few months ago, the British government decided to score A-level graduates by AI. That was a serious fail. Facial recognition. Most of the systems that train facial recognition systems are based on Caucasian faces, and then you use them on non-Caucasian faces. That's a misuse of technology. It was never intended for the purpose, and so you're going to get bad results, which are discriminatory. So that's not good. These are just few examples among many examples that one could give here. So we really have to figure this out as humanity, what standards to apply. It's important to me. I'm on the board of the AI Ethics Journal. So we publish papers to that effect. And of course, large corporations like Samsung and many others have an internal review board. When we get engaged in projects, the first question that gets asked, is, should we do this in the first place? Is it ethical to do that? And sometimes the answer is no. But it is a subjective question, and our own standards are our standards, and they're different from other people's standards, and I don't think that's right. That's something where I think we need an international community and where we need the involvement of governments.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Ng?
Yes, this is a very hot area. I think, Churchill's not always popular in every country, but he once said, like, war is too important to be left to the generals. So I think people are now saying, look, computer science is too important to be left up to computer scientists. You've got these very famous companies with brilliant PhDs and on their teams, and they release a product, some kind of face recognition product or image recognition, and they get egg on their face. And then anyone, they don't need a PhD to see why, well, you didn't actually have any non-Caucasian women in your database, or the test set didn't have this. Well, of course it won't work. I don't need a PhD to know that. And so what's quite important, I think, is in business, you need to have interdisciplinary teams. You can't sort of delegate it to an engineering group. You need diversity, both functionally and background in these teams, and anyone can participate. I mean, the course I teach basically has everybody from 18-year-olds and right up to PhD chemists and 90-year-olds, right? And say, look, all of you can learn the fundamentals, and then realize that many of the techniques we're using are not causal. I mean, they're just showing a relationship. Okay, it predicts something, the word or the color that someone might like, but it doesn't give a causal relationship. And this is where sort of causal science is not as prevalent as it could be. There's a book called The Book of Why by Judea Pearl, who got the Turing Award. It's kind of like the Nobel Prize of Computer Science. It tries to make it a bit more of an accessible thing, but many people think these AI systems are actually saying this is the reason why someone's a criminal, and actually it's not that. It's just saying there are relationships, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this is an approach. So I think businesses need to realize that. One way to realize that is not to be demeaning to the non-scientists in their organization. You need to bring them in and explain why it's working and how it's working. And often someone who's outside the core group say, well, actually, I don't think that's going to work because of this. And they'll beat out, PhD plus 20 years just with a simple targeted concept because of some domain knowledge that they'll have.
Thank you. I would like to say that I've asked this question of many people, and those are two of the most fulfilling and best responses I've received. Thank you for that. I'm going to close out this section on current state of AI with a question about leveraging AI that someone else has built. So as a business, you have the option of building your own AI or piggyback on some of the AI applications that are already out there. Patrick, you already spoke about Alexa, there is Google Home. So if you are a business, how can you leverage that?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about leveraging other people's AI technology, I think everybody does that all the time. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. If somebody else has already done that, and you can purchase it legally, of course. There is intellectual property theft going on all the time, which makes it illegal to do that, but that's a separate issue. Everybody does that, right? So for example, the major platforms that everybody uses to do their AI these days are called TensorFlow, PyTorch, Keras, and similar. These are available free of charge to anybody. And I mean, you would be wasting a lot of your personal time and effort if you didn't use one of them. So absolutely, yes, leverage other people's AI technology on multiple levels. On that level, which involves writing source code, doing math yourself, or fully fledged applications that are ready to go immediately. You can buy a ready-made chatbot that you can include on your website in literally an hour. That's obviously more usable and more encapsulated than PyTorch. If you're asking specifically about Alexa or Google Home, I would say those are not really AI technologies. Those are, Alexa is a consumer electronic that happens to have a natural language module in it. You can get natural language modules on your mobile phone or on your laptop, which are just as functional as Alexa. Alexa is just a little hardware device that makes it cute. How can you leverage these technologies as a business? I personally, at this moment in time, cannot think of how to leverage Alexa as a business use case. I'm sorry, I can't think of one. But how can I leverage third-party AI systems in general as a business? Well, the use cases abound. I can automate all sorts of processes in my office, in my manufacturing plant, in my logistics facility of how to transport stuff from A to B, optimize advertising for my goods and services, optimize where they are placed in a warehouse or in a retail store, optimize the calculation of how much each of these things should be priced at. So it goes through every step of a business.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Ng?
Yeah, I mean, things have improved a lot. 30 years ago, I used to write code from scratch, and I put more bugs in my code than I got code out. And these days, you can do this, quite a sophisticated, 132 layer convolutional neural net in like 2 lines of code on Keras. Right, because it's just calling libraries, and people should use them. And to some extent, it's sort of commoditized the skills. It's a bit like driving a car. Do you need to know how the engine works in every single level? You don't need to. It'd be nice, get a rough idea how a car works, and then you can drive it. You're kind of getting that level now in AI. You've got the rough idea how it works, but you don't need to know every single equation or optimization technique or how the back propagation works. You say, okay, here's the data, and I've got an intuition about what things could go wrong. So there's that level, and then I think there's a mini industry of component suppliers. There are lots of APIs, and a lot of these things like Siri and Alexa, they themselves are calling APIs. They'll cut a deal. I mean, they don't usually tell you what they're doing, so I have no idea. But certainly when I worked at BlackBerry, we'd cut a deal with weather.com to give us the weather directly as an API, and then wouldn't do it by doing a web crawl to do it, or a restaurant. We want to book a restaurant, get a deal with OpenTable or somebody like that. So these systems are using that not just as the machine learning part, but they're actually trying to build an environment and build a system to make it functional. So any business has got to figure that out. Has someone got a component I can just buy? How expensive is it? And then can we actually use it, or should we do it ourselves because it doesn't quite meet our needs? It's too expensive, etc. The concept of an AI app store is something I'm working on with a project called SuperBio, but that's for medical applications, right? Because biologists, they don't like programming. And so can they do drag and drop? And then, some clever person's developed a new optimization problem or a new sequencing methodology. Can they just upload it, and then other people can use it, but then the owner gets compensated for it as well? That comes back to my background because I did a lot of work on app stores. Is can you make the ecosystem work so it's easier? But I think the trends are all of these things. It's probably not just AI technology. All the things are becoming easier to get hold of, easier to use. We certainly have more knowledgeable people now who can help a business get on board with these new systems.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought. You know, every home has an Alexa these days, and you know, multiple. Oh, it's going to go off again. It just went off. That's why I went on mute a little while ago. Yeah, so Alexa skills is certainly something that business can look at. If there's anything they can leverage there. So we are moving on to our next section, which is future-looking AI. I think I'm going to limit you to 2 questions here. I know that this is an AI business panel. However, no AI panel is complete without asking this particular question. So I'm going to ask this, which is, the way AI is growing, can it ever overpower humans? I'm going to go to Patrick first again.
So my very personal opinion, I'm a big fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger. The Terminator movies are great, but they are complete fiction. I know that some people, including scientists, are concerned that the way AI is going, we could lead to a kind of Skynet Terminator type application at some point. I'm on the opposite end of the extreme. I'm quite pessimistic as to the capability of AI evolving to what's called artificial general intelligence, which is where a single system has multiple skills to the point where it can basically substitute a human being in its full range of capabilities, and then even surpass that, on top of that, being evil-minded enough to kind of take over and kill people. I deal with AI systems on a daily basis. I try to make them and make them better. And I know how often we get stuff wrong, really, really basic stuff that a toddler wouldn't get wrong. The AI consistently gets wrong. So I think we are incredibly far away from a Terminator type application, where I personally am not at all convinced if it's even possible to get that kind of system going. So my answer in brief would be no, and not in the foreseeable future.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Ng, what do you think?
Well, it's I think as I described, I'm actually on a project at Stanford University. It's called the Boundaries of Humanity. Is it possible for a machine to actually overtake a machine? And what would be the dynamics of that? And I'm with Patrick, you know, if you're in the short term, I'm with Patrick. As a practitioner, you say, look, this is ridiculous. We're nowhere near there. How can you even possibly have the discussion, right? But I keep coming back to like the state of the field 35 years ago, when we were just trying to recognize yes and no, or the digits, and we were working with like 1 kilobyte of memory and one kilohertz of clock cycle, and now we've got 100,000 times more computing power. If you take a similar traction in a 30 years time, another 100,000 times more computing power, you kind of like don't know what you don't know. So yes, generally the practitioners they'll give Patrick's exact argument, because look, the stuff we're doing is so difficult. Look, why are we having this discussion? It's like science fiction. But then you say, well, Elon Musk says we should worry about it. Stephen Hawking said we should be worried about it. And then we say, well, they're not usually practitioners themselves. They're clever people. It's different if you're on the coalface. And I think that it's worth asking the question. And where I think you're going to get systems, that will look human-like. We'll know they're not humans. I mean, even if you have to do it by hand, I know, and I've seen the job advertisement at Apple for a joke writer, for Siri, so you can just apply to be a job and write all the jokes. So eventually you just inject personality by hand, and then there are other projects, digital twin kind of projects, where you're trying to upload upload your entire personality, and maybe you've got 20 years of email like I have, and maybe you can get some level of my personality and get a new me, and then is it me anymore? And then you've got the other scenario, the Terminator scenario, where no, we already do this. We change bits of ourselves, knee transplants and cochlear implants and deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's, and that's just fixing arguably fixing 0.5% of your brain, but maybe there's something else you fix another 1% of your brain, and then there's something else you need to fix another 2%. And if you play it forward 100 years, are we actually terminating that 80% of our brain is actually a machine? When do we stop being a human? What does it mean to be a human? And so these are some of the topics to think about. They're more, I think, philosophy topics. I just read an article by Daniel Kahneman, who got the Nobel Prize for decision making, and he goes 4 keys to better decision making. And he says, well, when you've got an algorithm, don't trust the people, trust the algorithms. He's come down on that side. Algorithms beat individuals about half the time, and they match individuals about half the time. So there's not so many examples of people outperforming the algorithm in making predictive judgments. So he says, well, given the choice, figure out how to use the algorithm and train people how to deal with its inefficiencies and the like. So I think there's lots of discussion for that, but it goes back to the correlation, causation kind of thing. What can we actually do? But I think it's worth, and that's probably where management, the non-scientists, the non-machine learning people can inject their thoughts. Because when they ask the practitioners, say, look, I haven't got time to worry about this, I've just got to get my thing to work. And they say, well, let's play this forward. What's going to happen? And there's a few universities that's asking these questions now, and we're allowed to now. Probably 20 years ago, you wouldn't even be allowed to be thrown out of college because it's too wacky.
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to close out this segment with one final question. So when a new technology comes along, especially among business executives, there is a tendency to use the term first along with it. So we heard mobile first, digital first, cloud first. So when are we going to start saying AI first? Patrick?
Well, I think in some realms that has already happened. So definitely, again, with retail, there are quite a few applications that have put AI first. Again, the same example as before, Netflix is very much the whole business model, and the whole application is built around the recommender system that tells you what to watch next. That's an extremely simple example, but I think that it's going to grow like that. One of my personal focus areas right now is healthcare, particularly diagnosis of diseases using medical images. And I think there we will soon see that as well. Maybe in the next 5 years or so, it'll be an AI first kind of a thing, in the sense that right now, a medical image that gets taken gets sent to your doctor. Maybe not your personal doctor, but to the radiologist or the specialist in that area to have a look at. That person will write a little text report, which is virtually unreadable except by that individual and other people with a similar background. Then your personal physician would have a look at that, interpret it, and so on and so forth, and come up with a diagnosis and prescribe you a drug. Ultimately, that's what our medical system does, right? It processes sick people and pops out drugs, which is more like sick care rather than health care. But nonetheless, I think in a few years, we will have systems that are sophisticated enough that when the medical image is taken, the AI will first look at it, diagnose it, come up with a little report, and then have the human doctor basically validate that. So in making systems like this, we have noticed that on average, the accuracy of an individual physician trained in that specialty for years on years is about 80%. The accuracy of an AI system is typically about 98 to 99%. So, okay, I know we all quabble about the 1% that these systems get wrong, but ultimately the accuracy of the AI is higher than an individual doctor. Maybe not when you go to the Stanford medical system, but when you go to a random hospital, maybe in a rural area, I think the accuracy might drop. So you want systems like this to kind of do a base check. You don't want them to replace the doctor, but you want that system to assist and help the doctor. And I think that will go on through many industries. I think that will be soon the case in education, where we will see teachers being partially automated by AI systems so that people in rural areas or in the evenings and so on can get remedial help or assistant education by AI systems that will teach them high school math or something along those lines. I think we will see that in many different systems to help people with AI first.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Ng, AI first?
Yeah, AI first, I think could mean a couple of things. Certainly, like in the healthcare example we've just got from Patrick, it's sort of like a product level where it goes back to the Daniel Kahneman thing. Eventually, it's look, the machine's just going to be better. Just be better, and you should just use it and then avoid regret. Often people that use it and say, well, they're kind of like trying to second guess it. Now, we had a radiologist come into the class once, and the radiology profession was quite worried because a lot of these papers are coming out. Computer scientists, we have this joke, that if we have a relation who wants to enter medicine, we tell them, whatever you do, that's great profession, but just don't be a radiologist, right? And so I had a radiologist come in, and they said, you know what? Yeah, the professor is quite worried about this, but you know what? For the people who take that technology and use it, you know what? We're going to be superhuman. Our adjacent medical specialists in other fields, they're going to look like witch doctors. They don't have the tools that we're going to have in the next few years, which will basically make us superhuman, and we can process 10 times as many samples as we could do before with greater accuracy and more commentary and spend more time what we want to do. And so there's a first part in is the product physically better? The second concept of the first, though, which is what I thought was your original question, is how do we think about AI all the time? And probably the analogy here is I think it's going to happen all the time. It's going to happen quite soon. It's a bit like saying we want to be internet first. Now, no one talks about that anymore, right? Of course, we're going to have a website. Of course, we're going to communicate. We're going to send emails. We're going to customer service. People are going to say, even like mom and pop shops, say, okay, yeah, we need an automation system. We need to figure out, predict what ingredients we need to do for a Saturday night versus a Tuesday night, versus December versus May. I think that you're going to see it evolving into normal mainstream life with a set of tools and products that people are going to deploy. And then people are going to have to think, okay, I don't want to do it the dumb way. It'll take me 5 times more people, 5 times more time. I need to do it the simple way. That started off with internet 20 years ago. Now we're like, plus. This is how can we do it simply?
Thank you. Great responses again. So with that, I'm going to close that segment out. And we have just a few minutes left here. So I'm going to request each of our panelists to deliver their closing remarks, knowing that our participants are in India. If there's anything you can share that may benefit them. Again, start with Patrick, you first.
Yeah, so I realize we're talking to senior leaders of larger companies in India concerned with AI in business. And so I just want to say AI is there to supply a whole host of use cases. They can be applied in your business operations themselves in the office. They can be applied to manufacturing and supply chain. They can be applied to address your consumers, whoever they might be. And I think it will be to your advantage to use AI tools in all of these cases. Companies who use them earlier will benefit. Companies who use them later will struggle, and companies who refuse to use them for a sufficiently long period of time will go out of business. Either because they will simply be too expensive, because AI ultimately saves money in all the production costs, overhead costs, and also gives you access to new business models, new ways of addressing and communicating with your customers. So AI as a general topic, as a host or umbrella term for many different tools, I think is essential for the future of business in general and your business in particular. So I can only encourage you to look into what's available and to use that. And we had one question before, which was essentially, how do you leverage third-party technology? I would say, if third-party technology exists, leverage that, because it'll be far faster and typically far cheaper to use other people's existing technology than to develop your own. And so many tools already exist. With a little bit of attention, you can be very fast in deploying that in your business.
Thank you, Patrick. Dr. Mark?
Yes, I think following on from that, I think going back to AI first on the product level or on the operations level. And the main thing, people have to be literate these days, AI literate, that is. These days, the laws of AI math are exactly the same in Palo Alto as they are in Delhi or Timbuktu. There's no reason why innovation can't come from anywhere. I'll give a plug for Michael. I teach a course which actually right now in the next 2 quarters is online, which would fit the India time zone, because which is available to anybody. The evening class, at least, is available to anybody. People can just register. It's like a 10 lecture course, and it's not particularly expensive. That starts from scratch and then goes into some of these deeper techniques and talks about the topics we've talked about today. There's that. So that's the Stanford Continuing Studies website you can look at. And then think about the tools that are available are either free, or there's a whole industry that will sort of help you do it at reasonably low cost. But the main thing, you've got to think, where do I apply it? And that might involve having little subgroups. Maybe it's a little internal intranet, someone says, or a little tiny project, walk before you can run, to actually get started. But basically, there might be a tendency in India saying, well, I can just throw people at it instead because it's a bit cheaper than in the US. But eventually it catches up, and the quality of the product might not be as good. And I think what I encourage you is not just to build things for the rest of the world, because often they will take a spec from maybe Samsung or anybody else, and you'll have a software team that builds it. But how can you actually create your own spec and build technologies that the rest of the world can use that's useful to anyone? Because there's no reason why it can't be done.
Thank you, Dr. Nag, and I highly recommend Dr. Nag's course. It is online. I myself went through that, and I want to say that triggered my interest in AI. So thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Nag. And Patrick, you have an office in India, so I'm hoping that some of the business executives will continue to network with you and learn from each other. I'm going to publish both your contact information. If we have any India contact information, Patrick, I would like to include that. And I would definitely include the link to your course, Dr. Nag, with your permission as well. So with that, I know both of you are in the Bay Area. The weather is beautiful there, but you chose to be here to participate in this panel. I mean, even going out with a mask is still pretty good with this kind of weather. And I'm in Southern California. The weather is quite nice. There are parks and trails outside, but I wouldn't have traded this panel discussion for that, for sure. I certainly learned a lot myself. From the bottom of my heart, I truly appreciate both of you being here to help our program participants learn more about AI, how they can apply AI in their business. So with that, thank you very much, Patrick and Dr. Nag. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.